morning. And let me start by just saying ditto to all the laudatory opening that David did, I think, on behalf of all of us. And I'm going to, I want to start first just by acknowledging that we've reached a point now where we do see peace and development. It's normative to see the relationship between peace and development and to consider religious implications and all of that. And we've come a long way in order to get to this point, especially thinking about the relationship between peace and development in a more complicated way than just that easy assumption that more development equals more peace, but actually understanding the ways in which at the same time that new resources, addressing new development issues can address some of the underlying drivers of conflict, the creation of these new resources can also fuel competition between groups. And so the way that development is unfurled in different places needs to be considered with that conflict sensitivity in order to ensure that it's really addressing the underlying drivers and not fueling new conflict. But also the consideration of religion. One thing that really struck me when I began working in Burma is the degree to which the religious sector there, particularly the Buddhist monastic community, had really done all of the development in that country in the absence of the government responding to community needs. So when it came to issues of providing adequate education or responding to health needs and providing medical services for people, or, of course, in the midst of natural disasters that happened. It was really the religious sector that mobilized and responded to those needs. And you see that in a lot of different places where I work, violent conflict zones, where the state is paralyzed and unable to respond to the needs of the communities, or it's unwilling because of various conflict dynamics to respond to the needs of the community writ large or particular aspects of the communities. And in those places, in the midst of violent conflict, it really is the religious sector that is there around the country responding to those needs. So it's wonderful to acknowledge that and to continue to build on that in some of the most fragile, vulnerable places around the country. So my two punchlines that I wanted to focus on this morning are the who we engage in the religious sector in peace and development work, and the how we engage, and what are some of the considerations and consequences of the who and the how. And I want to begin first with the who. Which religious actors we engage. I'm sure many of you have seen, as I have, that in many of the places where the big international organizations are operating, or the donor organizations operate, that there tends to be a phenomenon of engaging the same religious actors again and again. And generally, all generalizations aren't true, of course, but a trend, at least historically, has been that those from within the religious sector who are engaged are primarily older men who are the institutional authorities and have tended to be more Christian, majority Christian, at least in the past. And there are practical reasons for this. Of course, on the gender spectrum, it's men generally around the world who serve as the institutional authorities within the religious sector and who are visible and who are perceived to be most powerful within the religious sector. So it makes sense to engage with them in order to have the most impact from an outsider perspective. And then secondly, on the Christian side of it, I tend to think that comes down to a couple different things. One is that for at least the Western aid organizations or donor organizations, it's easier to engage with the Christian sector because they tend to speak English because of missionary education in the past, and they have tended to do development and peace work in the models and the methods that are most recognizable to the international community and to the outside donor organization. And you go to what you recognize. And so that sector has been sort of the most visible and the most readily and easily accessible, just as the male religious institutional authorities have been the most easily accessible and the most visible to those who seek to engage with the religious sector. Now, again, this is changing on both elements. And in particular, I know we have Vinya here, is from Sarvodaya in Sri Lanka. We have Islamic Relief is one of the organizations that's co-funding this. And there are these trends towards recognizing and engaging with broader swaths of the religious community in this work. But the fact that in the past, historically, these two trends have tended to dominate some of the religious engagement has had consequences. So first, on the gender side of things, one of the unfortunate consequences of that is that the work of religious engagement in peace and development has tended to further the marginalization of women from decision-making on peace and development, which is exactly why UN Security Resolution 1325 and other UN security resolutions were passed in order to recognize the marginalization of women from these decisions and these agendas, and to ensure that they were better mainstreamed, recognizing that women have different development needs, they have different experiences in conflict, and they bring different perspectives and lens, ways of analyzing conflict, ways of understanding what are the needs in the midst of conflict in order to build peace. Same with development. So we need to ensure that our work in religious engagement is not undermining that other aspect of the development and peace agenda, which is to empower and include and respond to the needs of women. I sometimes picture somebody, my mom maybe, knitting a scarf, and even as things are being knit, somebody on the other side is unfurling it. So even as we're engaging with religion in really positive ways to strengthen peace and development, we need to ensure that things aren't unraveling on the other side because of these unintended consequences. And given the research that is increasingly showing that gender disparities, gender inequality can fuel violent conflict, we need to ensure that the work that we do in religious engagement is not contributing to that driver of conflict. The other sticky issue has been the peacebuilding then that has been more equated with the Christian world and Christian work and some of the big Christian organizations involved in peace and development work. And I think this is a particular issue in some of the places where I work that are post-colonial, non-Christian majority contexts. So again, Sri Lanka is a great example here, where because this work has tended to be equated with the Christian world, that fuels some of the anxieties of those on the ground of neocolonialism or of new forms of missionizing. That if those who are engaged in the peace and development work, those who are getting some of the big funding and support from the outside communities are the Christian organization, that draws, or that exacerbates the anxieties that some of the non-Christian communities feel in those areas, that this is ways in which the Christian world and the Western Christian world is trying to influence the local culture and the local context. I could go, there's a lot more complicated issues involved in that. Okay, so let me just say the how real quickly. And the two things I want to address are the instrumentalization and interfaith dialogue. So on instrumentalization, we've been saying this for years, that religious leaders can't just be engaged in order to come in and bless development projects that have already been designed and conceived by the international community, but they need to be involved from the beginning in designing and conceiving them, because they're very sensitive to being used and exploited. And I thought that was sort of a given, but in some of the conversations that are going on right now in Washington, D.C. around countering violent extremism, I'm seeing again hints of this sort of instrumentalizing religious leaders. How can we use religious leaders as vehicles for nice messages that we like about Islam or about other religions? And so I'm bringing up this issue again because I don't think it's a dead one, and I think it's one that we need to continue to drive home. And then the second one is interfaith dialogue or interfaith engagement, which has been a core component of development work, engaging with the religious sector with a conflict sensitivity lens. And the issue I want to drive home here is that interfaith dialogue can't just be about building horizontal relationships and understandings between communities, but also must address some of the structural governance issues. And this gets to the real point of the panel that we're talking about today, of what is that relationship between social norms, religious engagement, but also political, legal, economic issues. And until the religious engagement and the religious development, religious peace-building world begins to operate in a much more systems-based approach and analysis, where we're not just doing a little bit of religious engagement here, a little bit interfaith dialogue here, but actually looking at how that religious engagement can really lead to structural changes that are at the heart of violent conflict, that are at the heart of fragile states, then it's going to be continuing to just drop little stones in an ocean. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you.